Sup, family? I'm Leon, the Paperback Maniac, coming at you with a mega sick horror movie haul. I've done one of these in the past, had fun with it. People seem to enjoy it. So I'm back at it again because I got a lot of movies in the last couple of months. I don't know if I'm breaking any rules here. Some of you may be wondering, why is the Paperback Maniac talking about movies? I thought I was watching BookTube. Well, I've got some news for you, homieette. I do whatever the hell I want. So, with that being said, let's get to it because there are a lot of movies to share here. First up, we are talking about a release that just came out. This is Idle Hands, which was released in 1999 originally, directed by Rodman Flender. And this was a video store staple for me and my friends in high school in the late 90s. It's not one that I saw in the theater. I don't think anyone saw this in the theater. It kind of got unlucky and was released around the time of Columbine. But when it was on video, it was like this movie and Dead Man on Campus, another great movie that no one seems to talk about. Where's the Blu-ray for that one? I don't know. But that was another one. These two we kind of rented over and over again. Loved them. Haven't seen it in a while. So definitely looking forward to revisiting this one. In fact, I think I might do that tonight. I might grab myself a safari burger and pop in Idle Hands, just like old times. Hashtag quarantine life, baby.
Although, who am I kidding? I'd be doing that on a regular Saturday night.
All right, next up, another new release, recent release. This is Mind Games. This originally came out in 1989. It was directed by Bob Yari, and it was put out by MVD for their Rewind collection. And this is one that I was unfamiliar with, but the cover really stood out to me, and it's one of those like late 80s, early 90s From Hell movies. Like they had all those back then, like the roommate from hell, the nanny from hell. Well, this is the flute-playing, camper hitchhiker from hell. And it is amazing. I loved this movie. Like, where has this been? And it was really, really cool. And this is a stacked release. So, yeah, very, very fun discovery for me. Really glad to have that in the collection. All right, next up, another kind of somewhat more recent release. This is Mirror, Mirror. This originally came out in 1990. It was directed by Marina Sargenti, and it was put out by Dark Force Entertainment. And it's fun. It's a fun little late 80s, that kind of cusp of 80s to 90s horror. And the protagonist, the main female character in this, is clearly like a stand-in for Winona Ryder in Beetlejuice. It's like they wish they could get Winona Ryder. They were never going to get Winona Ryder, but they got basically her doppelganger, and this girl is just like Winona Ryder basically in Beetlejuice. But it's a fun movie, not great, but definitely a cool one. And I love that period of late 80s, early 90s, the aesthetic especially. All right, next up, this is another one that I was really unfamiliar with. This is Primal Scream, and this originally came out in 1987. It was directed by William J. Murray, and this was also put out by Dark Force Entertainment in collaboration with Code Red DVD, which is one of my favorite releasing companies. And this is apparently sci-fi horror, which I'm a big fan of, mixed with noir stuff. So I was I really never heard of this thing and was totally unfamiliar with it, so it was a blind buy. Haven't opened it up or watched it yet, but looking forward definitely to checking this one out. Okay, next up, this is another fun one from around that period of late 80s, early 90s. We have The Banker. This came out originally in 1989. It was directed by William Webb, also put out by Dark Force Entertainment, in collaboration with Code Red DVD. And this is a really fun little sort of undiscovered gem that I don't think a lot of people know about. It's kind of like a thriller mixed with a slasher. It's got the great late Robert Forster, rest in peace, and apparently this was one of Quentin Tarantino's favorites back in his old video store days when he worked at the video store. This was like, I guess, like always on his like employee picks rack, and it may contribute to why he eventually cast Robert Forster and Jackie Brown. But yeah, if you haven't seen this one and you like sort of like thrillers with a slasher vibe, check out The Banker. This cover, I don't know why they went with this cover, honestly, but... all right, now we have some Vinegar Syndrome releases. First up, we've got Dolly Dearest, and this one originally came out in 1991. It was directed by Maria Leese, and I mean, first of all, just look at this amazing slipcover. I mean, no one does it like Vinegar Syndrome. They really put their blood, sweat, and tears into these releases. They're just incredible, incredible releases. I had never seen this movie before. Of course, I had always heard about it. You know, it's like, you know, always talked about as sort of like the early 90s Child's Play ripoff film. And it's nowhere near as good as any of the Child's Play movies, even the lesser ones. But you know, the animatronics are cool, and it's an interesting and fun little cheesy flick. Nothing fantastic, but I mean, God, this release is just like incredible. This movie does not deserve to have a release this amazing, frankly. All right, continue along with Vinegar Syndrome. This is another one of their brand new releases, just came out this month. Pale Blood. This originally came out in 1990, and it was directed by Vivi Dachin Hisu. Yeah, this is an interesting one. The coolest thing about this movie is it's set in L.A. in, you know, like late 80s, like early 90s, and it's got a lot of great footage of LA in that time period, and it's kind of like an interesting time capsule, and it has like footage of like the clubs and some of like the bands that play and just like the traffic on the streets. I love that stuff. I think it's really really cool. But then I heard that this movie was also shot, a lot of it was shot in Hong Kong. So it's hard. So obviously maybe they were using stock footage for the LA stuff. I don't know, but it was pretty seamless. And I mean, I live in Southern California, and it would have fooled me. There is, I think, maybe the original cover. Definitely does not seem like my kind of movie, an erotic vampire thriller. However, this movie does have the amazing Wings Hauser playing a psychopath, which, I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. In fact, there's going to be another Wings Hauser playing a psychopath coming up later, because you can't have enough of that. All right, but still with Vinegar Syndrome here, another one of their more recent releases. This is Deadline. This movie originally came out in 1984. It was directed by Mario Azzopardi. And this is an interesting little flick. There's the original. And I do remember this original cover. But yeah, this one is like about a writer, and who writes a horror writer, and then it's kind of like gets fantastical, where like where does his fiction end and his reality begin? And it's kind of really surreal. It's got some gnarly gore scenes, and it thematically and plot wise, it definitely has some similarities with Fulci's movie The Cat in the Brain, which came out later in the decade. But yeah, an interesting flick. I didn't actually love this one. I think that this might be one that I need to like see a couple of times to fully appreciate, but it was definitely interesting. And for those of you who like horror movies about writers, particularly horror writers, here is a good, like, kind of more obscure one for you to check out. All right, one more Vinegar Syndrome one here. Next we have Extro 3, Watch the Skies. This came out in 1995. It was directed by Harry Bromley Davenport, who I believe directed all 3 Extro movies. And yeah, this one, I actually still have not watched this, but it looks cool. I just love the character design of Extro. And and actually, speaking of Extro, after I got that one, I love the first Extro, and I went ahead and picked up this Second Sight release of the film. I did previously have sort of like this really fancy German media book, but I felt like that was unnecessary, and honestly, this one has like more special features. This one's stacked, and it is a great release. So I sold my German media book and picked up this one for like half the price, and I'm totally satisfied with it. If you have not seen Extro, it is one of the most batshit early 80s creature features. This one came out in 1982, right on the heels of E.T. Not all extraterrestrials are friendly. And it is just ludicrous and absurd. It's like the kind of movie, it's like the quintessential, like, what the fuck were they thinking? What were they snorting as they like developed this film? But I love it for that. It is a batshit crazy fun time. Great creature, like great early, like goopy creature effects. And just a gonzo story. So yeah, check out Extro if you haven't seen it. Okay, next up, I kind of alluded to this earlier. We have The Wind. This one is from 1986. It was directed by Nikos Mastorakis, a Greek filmmaker. And Arrow Video put this one out recently. And I love how they always include, the reversible. This is the original, I think. Well, one of the original cover arts for this film. But this movie also, like Pale Blood, features a psychotic Wings Hauser chasing this woman, through the night. And it is just, it's shot really, really well. There's a lot of atmosphere. Like Nikos Mastorakis, I don't like all of his films, but one thing that cannot be denied is that the man did have a sense of style, and he just infuses so much atmosphere into his films. They're always like filled with smoke and like misty light, and it's just really, really impressively like directed. So yeah, and this was a fun one. This is kind of like another like thriller with heavy slasher vibes. But I was happy that I picked this up. I did enjoy watching it. All right, next up, this is a new discovery for me, and I don't know like how I missed this, for so long. But this is Funny Man. This movie came out in 1994. It was directed by Simon Sprackling. Screenbound Releasing put it out. This is a UK region-free release, I believe. But this movie is basically like the UK's answer to like late-stage Freddy Krueger, like their version of like a quipping, jokey, ridiculous horror villain with amazing prosthetic makeup and a cool look. And that's totally like the kind of shit that I love. I love these sort of like silly, cheesy 90s horror villains. I'm thinking like Leprechaun. This one apparently has a lot of cool gore and effects. So I'm thinking like Wishmaster. I haven't seen it yet though, so I don't know. Maybe I'll be sorely disappointed. If any of you are familiar with Funny Man, let me know. I'm definitely going to be watching this soon though, because it sounds right up my alley. Just like goofy, cheesy 90s horror with like a villain who is spouting one-liners left and right. So that's pretty cool. All right, next up we've got Faust, this Love of the Damned. And this one came out in 2000. It was directed by Brian Yuzna, and it is, this was put out by, Shock Entertainment. It's another, this is a German media book. I don't think this movie has a stateside Blu-ray release. But this is, I believe, based on a comic book hero and a dark kind of comic book. This is the kind of like comic book movie that I am down with. It's got Jeffrey Combs. It's got a pretty good cast. But, I honestly don't care too much for comic book movies. Like, I've completely lost interest in. I can't remember the last like Marvel Universe movie I've seen. I can't follow it. I can't keep up with it. I don't really care to keep up with it. But movies like Faust or Darkman, now those are the kind of comic book movies. Or those types of movies are the ones that I am interested in. So yeah, this one is pretty cool. It's got effects by Screaming Mad George, who worked with Brian Yuzna a lot. So that alone, if you know anything about Screaming Mad George, that should tell you like it's always worth checking out a movie that Screaming Mad George worked on, because that dude is just like comes up with this most surreal, freaky, like just nightmarish shit, and it's just amazing. So yeah, this is not a very well-known one. Check it out if you're into kind of darker superhero movies. Okay, and then keeping with Brian Yuzna, next we've got Beyond Reanimator. This was also directed by Yuzna. It came out in 2003, Vestron Video, the late Vestron Video, because I think they've stopped, unfortunately, putting out stuff. But this one, this is one that I actually had not seen until I picked this up. I watched this like about a month or so ago. And I don't know why I had like put it off for so long. I guess I just assumed that it was like a direct-to-video like piece of shit. Although I don't know why that's a problem. I love that stuff. But I mean, I'm such a huge fan of the first Reanimator. It is like it's definitely in my top 10 like favorite horror films ever. And I like the second one quite a bit too. But I guess because this one came out like years later, I just assumed it was going to be disappointing, and I didn't want to like subject myself to that and taint the legacy in my mind of Reanimator. But you know what? Surprisingly, I actually had a lot of fun with this one. I love the way it opens. It opens in this like super like pulpy, like EC Comics style way. And it's got great gore, great makeup effects, a pretty cool story, and yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I was dead wrong about this. I mean, it's not as good as the first one or the second one probably, but it is definitely worth checking out if you are a Reanimator fan, or if you're just like a fan of zombie movies, but like cool zombie movies. So, all right, and then one more Brian Yuzna movie, because I'd gotten those. I went ahead and picked up Return of the Living Dead Part 3. This one was directed by Brian Yuzna in 1993, and this was also put out by Vestron Video. And this was always my least favorite of the films. The first one, also one of my favorites, easily in my top 10 favorite horror films. The second one is not as good, not nearly as good. It's more of a comedy, but it's got some charm. But this one, I remember, like, I saw this it had been a while, but I remember this one being, like, super dark. Like, I remember it just being, like, a complete downer. It had none of the comedy, none of the levity of the first two. And that was, like noticeable, very noticeable to me when I saw this, like, in my early 20s. But, you know what? Watching this again, this thing has, I mean, it's got some of the most amazing effects. Brian Yuzna, one thing you could always count on in his films was just amazing, just like over the top, fantastical, surreal set pieces and special effects. Narratively, he was not very strong, and I think he even admitted that like his films structurally were not always the soundest. Narratively, were not always the most satisfying, but when it comes to makeup and gore and just like that fun feeling, right? Always practical effects, a lot of prosthetics and latex. I mean, and this is a guy that worked with Screaming Mad George a lot, and when those two got together, I mean, like, the shit that they came up with is just incredible, right? Like, I'm thinking like Society, right? The shunting scene. So yeah, like, it's worth watching his flicks for the things that he is good at. And this one definitely has some really memorable imagery and iconic almost kind of, and I think this resurrected girlfriend is an iconic character, but still it is a downer. It's a very sad movie, and I don't necessarily like to watch like sad horror movies all the time, but yeah, it's cool. It's a good one. All right, kind of like tangentially related to those. Next up, we've got Castle Freak. This was directed by Stuart Gordon, Yuzna's bro, the late Stuart Gordon, may he rest in peace. This one came out in 1995. This was sort of loosely, I guess, adapted from an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Outsider. And 88 Films put this out. This is a UK release. And yeah, this is a good one. It's not my favorite. It's far from my favorite Lovecraft adaptation or my favorite Stuart Gordon movie. But it is pretty cool. And this one is apparently getting a remake currently. Like, I think it's even maybe wrapped filming. I hope so. Otherwise, who knows when it's coming out. But I guess Fangoria, the movie studios, is putting it out. So hopefully it'll be better than like the last couple Fangoria movies that came out. Like, I don't know, when they launched that, I was like super like excited about Puppet Master: The Littlest Reich. I thought that was fun because it was like so politically incorrect and just like over the top. But like the last couple have been like pretty disappointing, frankly. But I don't know. High hopes for the Castle Freak remake. Yeah, this is a good one. And then, okay, another Stuart Gordon Lovecraft movie. We've got Dagon. This one was, this came out in 2001, and this was based off of the Lovecraft story Shadow over Innsmouth. Not really Dagon. I guess there's like incorporated some elements of Dagon, but really it's Shadow over Innsmouth. And, you know, despite some wonky CGI, especially like viewed like from today's standards, this is definitely gets that feel of Lovecraft right. It feels like a Lovecraft film. And, you know, Gordon had been wanting to make this for a long time. In fact, originally, this was supposed to be his and Yuzna's follow-up to Reanimator, like back in the 80s, but they couldn't get the budget for it. When they told people the plot of like these crazy fish people, I guess like all the studios were like, what the hell are you talking about? No one wants to see that shit. So they ended up doing From Beyond instead. But they've been, you know, so the screenplay was actually the first draft that Dennis Paoli had written was like written back in the 80s, and they just kind of updated it slightly. They changed the setting to Spain because they could like get locations easier there. So it doesn't take place in the States, you know, the way Lovecraft should take place, honestly. But cool movie. If you haven't checked this one out, it is a good Lovecraft adaptation. It feels, even, you know, despite its budgetary constraints at times. Okay, yes. All right, so moving on. Next up, this is a more recent indie film. I do like to support indie filmmakers who are any good. And this is Close Calls. This came out in 2019. Well, it was released in 2019. I think it was filmed maybe a year or two earlier. And it was written and directed by a guy named Richard Stringham. And there is a lot of passion and enthusiasm behind this thing, and a lot of talent. Now, I'm not going to front with you guys. This thing, the one problem with it is that this dude really should have hired an editor. I mean, he did like pretty much everything on this, because the movie runs like over 2 hours, which is fucking ridiculous. That's absurd. Like, this movie should not be it shouldn't even be close to 2 hours. I mean, that's like the equivalent of a 500-page Zebra novel. It doesn't need to happen. Should not happen. But this movie has just got a lot of style, and it's got, just like I said, a lot of enthusiasm and passion. Definitely has a heavy Italian horror influence, especially with the colors. A lot of like blue and red gels and mist and smoke. It's super atmospheric, and frankly, for a first time film from a guy who's not like, I don't think he's like even been trained as a filmmaker, it really stylish and well done. And it's got a really compelling lead, this girl, and you know, she's like running around throughout the whole movie like in her bra. No complaints there. But yeah, it's got like an old school feel to it. There's the cover. Because I ordered this direct from the distributor, or the Scream team releasing put this out. It's got a signature from the director and the star, that girl. But I mean, to give you an idea, it is, I'll show you the reversible cover art. It feels like, you know, that film that you would find on the video store aisle like in the late 80s. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I mean, despite its length, it shows a lot of panache from the screenwriter, or from the director, and I'm very eager to see what he comes up with next. So I think that's on Prime now, so you can check it out if you're curious, you know, for free if you have Prime. Okay, another recent indie movie. Like I said, I do like to support the indie filmmakers that I like. This is The Shed. I know the glare is bad there, but this one came out in 2019. It was directed by Frank Sabatella, and here's another guy who you can tell he loves all those horror movies, like the last guy. He loves all that stuff that we like, right? Like, he's a true fan. This movie definitely has an old school flair, although it, you know, he smartly sets it in modern times. And I thought it was cool. I mean, yeah, it's nothing like groundbreaking. It's not amazing. It's not like a 5 out of 5 or a 10 out of 10. But I mean, does every movie need to be like amazing? Like sometimes I see reviews and people are like shitting on these movies and I'm like, what did you expect? Like this is a low budget indie film. I think for what it was trying to achieve, like it did it fairly well. So yeah, if you are into indie film, like low budget indie movies, I think you could do a lot worse than this one. Okay, another indie horror flick from recent, from recent times is Daniel Isn't Real. This one came out in, 2019, and it was written and directed by Adam Egypt Mortimer, and it was actually him in collaboration. He wrote it with another guy. Who's the other guy? Brian DeLue, based on his novel that they adapted. I thought this was really well done. It's kind of like a take on The Imaginary Friend. So think like a horror version of Drop Dead Fred in a way, who kind of comes back like when the guy's like older and troubled and like tries to help him out. But, it's got that kind of bad influence vibe with like James Spader, like from their early 90s. And it's cool. I love the premise of this. I will admit, I do wish the filmmaker had took it a little further. He kind of starts to get really interesting toward the end, but like he like holds back a little bit. I don't know if that was just like because like, I mean, I get it. These days, these filmmakers always have to be thinking of budget, but it really just makes me pine for the freaking 80s and 90s when budget wasn't really a concern and they would go the whole way. This one, it kind of like doesn't stick the landing exactly, but still good enough, I think, to own. And, I would recommend it for people, to check out. If you have Shudder, I think it's on there. All right. Continuing along. Next up, we've got an independent horror movie from the 80s. This is Slime City. And this came out in 1988. It was written and directed by Gregory Lamberson. And this release is from Retro Shockorama. And this is a super low budge, not a great movie, but I am a big fan of like melt movies and like body melt movies, street trash, and so on. So like it's like of that ilk, and it's cool. And these low budget movies, I like to watch them oftentimes with the commentary because, like I said, I love the passion behind these young filmmakers. And it's really interesting to like hear how they like, scrapped up the money and like got this thing made like against all the odds and stuff. So yeah, if you're a fan of slimy, gooey, like body melt type horror, then check out Slime City. It's cool. Okay. Continuing along, we're about halfway done, guys. I wasn't lying when I told you this is mega. All right, next up, we've got The Visitor. This movie is from 1979. It was directed by Giulio Paradisi, going, of course, as Michael Paradise, because back then they always tried to like pass it off like they were Americans. And this release is from Drafthouse Films. Now, this is an infamous cult movie, one that I've heard about for years, and for whatever reason, had never seen, never checked it out. And the thing that prompted me to get this actually is a coffee table book called Ad Nauseam, which I showed in my last horror book haul, which is basically a collection of old newspaper ads for horror films from the 80s. And, even though this is from the late 70s, of course, it was playing still in the early 80s. And I saw, when I'm flipping through this coffee table book, I see the ad for The Visitor, and I thought like it hooked me. And like, so it's kind of funny, even years, like decades later, I'm still getting suckered in from these ads. I saw that thing and I was like, you know what? I gotta watch this movie. That looks amazing and batshit crazy. And I love, like fantastical, weird, like science fiction infused horror. So I ordered the Blu-ray, and I'm so happy I did, because this movie is fucking gonzo. What a weird... I mean, only the Italians could have come up with this. I mean, it's kind of like, I guess, a take on the Evil Kid book, but that's almost... I mean, that's selling it short. That's doing it a disservice because it's so much more than that. I actually watched this late last night, and God, what a crazy fucking movie. But very, very cool. If you're into cult, like weird late 70s cult films, it's an Italian production, I get. Well, but it's got like Lance Henriksen, and it was filmed in the States, like in Atlanta. So yeah, very, very interesting film. Definitely worth checking out. All right, moving along. Had to do it. I had to pick up a copy of Cobra, one of the best Stallone films, in my opinion. This one came out in 1986. It was directed by George P. Cosmatos, the father of Panos Cosmatos, who you may, be familiar with. He directed Mandy, which was a huge hit on the indie circuit, last year. But God, Cobra is fucking badass. I mean, first of all, look at that iconic cover. Like, what a badass he is. This is Stallone firing on all cylinders. And this is, I love this period in the 80s where like horror or some horror movies, like the slasher craze was influencing the action movies, because this movie, I mean, it could be almost considered like a pseudo slasher in a way. And I think Scream Factory even put this out recently in a collector's edition. And I love that. That's so cool. Like the action slasher movie. There was a Chuck Norris movie from around the same time called Silent Rage, I think, that was also sort of like inspired by, those early 80s slasher movies. But yeah, Cobra is just a badass motherfucker, and this is a great, great flick. I'll take Cobra over, Rambo First Blood 2 any day, but, that's just me, so... All right, next up, going back to like kind of indie horror, recent indie horror. This is a film that has not really gotten a lot of talk. This is Secret Santa, probably because that title is the tritest thing ever. How many movies are called Secret Santa? But this Secret Santa came out in 2018. It was directed by Adam Marcus, and that's honestly the only reason that my interest was piqued, because the last horror movie Adam Marcus directed, got to go way back into the 90s, and it's a movie that is actually maligned and detested by a number of horror fans, and that would be Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, a movie that I unabashedly love. In fact, this is a controversial statement, it is like one of my favorite Friday the 13th movies. I know that it's completely different, but that's why I love it. I don't consider it a Friday the 13th movie. I mean, if I want a Jason movie, I'll watch... like the final chapter or Jason Lives. But that movie, it almost feels more like a sequel to The Hidden, one of my favorite like horror sci-fi movies. And it's just crazy. And it's got amazing early gore effects from K&B, and it's just fun. It's just a fun movie. If you watch it without expecting like a typical Friday the 13th movie, it's just a great early 90s gory fun movie. So yeah, that director directed this one, Secret Santa, which is a horror comedy, and it had gotten quite a lot of hype. Like the reviews on Amazon, if you look, are just like incredible. Like people love this movie on Amazon, and so I checked it out. And yeah, it was cool. It was, it was very, you could see the budget, like, constraints on this one. Like, it did, obviously it doesn't have, like, the polish of, like, Final Friday, for sure. But it was cool. Like, I think this would be one that I would revisit, like, around, like, Christmas time. Like, I saw this, like, nowhere near Christmas time. But I don't think you need to enjoy the film. But yeah, it was cool. It was like a kind of a dark comedy that kind of just goes a little batshit. But yeah, cool movie. I would recommend checking it out. All right, next up, we're going to Sleazeville here. We've got Don't Answer the Phone. This movie originally came out in, 1980. It was directed by Robert Hammer. This was put out by Vinegar Syndrome. And this is a movie that I had always heard about, and I had always heard that it was kind of like the West Coast version of Maniac, basically. Maniac, a movie that I love, one of my absolute favorite kind of like gritty, grimy NYC horror flicks. And this is like, similarly gritty and grimy and sleazy, but takes place in Hollywood. I think the original title was like The Hollywood Strangler or The Hollywood Hills Strangler or something. And that sounds cool. I love movies that sort of depict that time period and seeing like, the old like Hollywood Boulevard, like the old Times Square, like in New York. So I haven't actually opened this or checked it out yet, but I'm waiting for the mood for like a particularly grim and sleazy, gritty movie. So I'm looking forward to watching that. All right, next up, here's an indie movie that I'm a big fan of. I feel like it does not get enough love, and that is Jack Brooks' Monster Slayer. This movie came out back in 2007. It was directed by John Knotts. Anchor Bay put this out in a bare bones release, but it's a fun movie. It's like a cool horror comedy. It's got some, despite its low budget, it's got some really great practical effects. It's got an amazing performance by Robert Englund that is just like worth the price of the film by itself. But yeah, I think that this is just a fun, if you just like a fun, like want a fun like Friday night pizza type flick, check out Jack Brooks' Monster Slayer. It's a shame this movie didn't do better and get a sequel, because like I could have seen like this be like a little like an Evil Dead type like series, but yeah, really fun. All right, now we're going to Stephen King Town, Stephen King TV Town. We've got Stephen King's The Stand. This is one that I think a lot of people probably have been wanting to revisit in these pandemic times. This is the original, like the entire original TV miniseries from 1994. It was directed by Mick Garris, and it came out through a CBS Blu-ray. And I hadn't seen this thing like since the 90s. And so, when I revisited it, it was fun. It was a cool movie. I forgot, like Mick Garris. I love the dude. He's like the nicest guy ever. Like he's like super. Like his movie company is even called Nice Guy Productions. He's like a vegan. His stuff tends to be kind of saccharine, overly sweet, and that's probably why he does a lot of Stephen King stuff. And and Stephen King actually wrote this the screenplay to this, and they actually have a commentary of Mick Garris and Stephen King on here, which would be really fun to listen to if I had like 6 hours to kill. But yeah, this is a cool movie. It definitely has that early 90s feel. It may be like, yeah, it's definitely not like the best Mick Garris movie ever is Sleepwalkers, which Stephen King wrote. But yeah, this is cool. It's a fun movie, and it is a little eerie to watch it now and just kind of see a lot of the similarities between like the pandemic there and what we, what our fear has been here. Okay, and then the other Stephen King movie is The Night Flyer. This is one that I had never seen, but I'd heard a lot about. It came out in 1997. It was directed by Mark Pavia, and it's I guess calling it a TV movie is a bit of a misnomer because it's an HBO movie. It's not HBO, or it's not a movie. It's not TV. It's HBO, right? Is that what they said? But and that it's a shame that it's HBO actually, because that means it probably will never get a proper like Blu-ray release, because there's a lot of great movies that HBO owns they're just sitting on, like The Hitcher, Full Eclipse, one of my favorite like action horror hybrid movies, werewolf cop movie. Also, Cast a Deadly Spell, a really, really cool early 90s Lovecraft-inspired movie. Yeah, I don't know why they don't, like, release their stuff physically. Probably because, I don't know, they want people to subscribe, but they're not playing this shit on there, are they? I don't know. But yeah, The Night Flyer, I'd heard a lot about this, and yeah, it was actually pretty good. It was a cool movie. I had to go with the DVD because that's really the only way you can watch it these days. All right, pause for a little sip here, getting parched. Shout out to Adam Caesar. So I was watching a video of his a few weeks back. He did like a full moon video. And he showed this movie, which I was unfamiliar with, called Trophy Heads. This is a more recent full moon movie, which is probably why I didn't bother with it. It came out in 2014. It was actually directed by Charles Band, the man himself, the man, the legend. Yeah, came out through Full Moon, of course. And I gotta say, man, for like a latter day full moon movie, so it gets all like these old scream queens back, and it's like about this crazy stalker who like collects them and makes them reenact scenes from their movie, and then chops off their heads and keeps them. And it was actually really fun. It was a good time. I was surprised. I was like, man, Full Moon. It shows that. When he's trying, Charles Band still has it in him to make an entertaining B flick. So, yeah, I'm happy that I watched that Adam Caesar video and he convinced me to give this a shot because it was a good time. And then after watching that and kind of being in the Full Moon spirit, I went ahead and grabbed a copy of Demonic Toys, probably my favorite full moon movie. I think it's got to be like one of the better full moon movies. I mean, there are better like Empire Picture movies that he had before he started Full Moon, but in terms of like full moon, like post Puppet Master, this is one of the best. And this came out in 1992. It was directed by Peter Manoogian and put out by Full Moon. And just it's a fun B movie, man. It's got some really cool animatronics. Which I love. I love like early 90s, late 80s, early 90s animatronics. I miss that stuff so much. So if you're not well versed in the Full Moon canon, this would be a great one to start with. Demonic Toys. It's basically like the celluloid version of like a zebra novel, but cheesier maybe. Okay. Now we got some more Scream Factory titles. Next up, we've got House on Haunted Hill, the remake that came out in 1999, directed by William Malone. And I have always actually loved this one. I think it's a super cool movie. There's the original cover, it's so like that period, right? The 90s, like crappy covers. But this is a fun haunted house movie. And it's just, I hadn't seen it actually in a while. And Jeffrey Rush is so awesome in it. So really, really good time. I'm happy that this finally got a proper Blu-ray release. Okay, another movie Scream Factory put out that's a lot more obscure is After Midnight. This is an anthology that came out in 1989. It was directed by a couple of brothers, Jim and Ken Wheat, and I got hip to this because of the Retro Movie Love podcast, one of my favorite podcasts of all time. Love the host, Michael Ferrari. This dude has such passion for these like old movies, and just I love that about him. And he like raved about this movie, saying he liked it almost as much as Creepshow. And I was like, what? I was like, how have I not seen that? So I checked it out. Yeah. Not on that Creepshow level, but it's super fun. It's very, very charming. The wraparound story is just delightful. It had me laugh, just smiling. Don't expect anything amazing from this, but super, super fun. And if you love, like, as I do, that late 80s, like early 90s aesthetic, it's all right here. Well represented. A more like an earlier Scream Factory release that I finally got around to picking up is this double feature of Ghost House and Witchery. And I didn't write the information for Witchery. I don't think anyone gives a shit about it. I mean, I don't know. Let me know if you've seen Witchery. But Ghost House was directed by Umberto Lenzi, going under the name, I got a kick out of this, Humphrey Humbert. That's the English American like style name he decided to go with. It reminds me of Humbert. I don't know, but Ghost House came out in 1988. It is like a batshit crazy Italian take on like a poltergeist type movie, but just like gorier and cheesier because it's fucking the Italians and they're amazing. I haven't actually opened this one, but I'm stoked to check it out. Believe it or not, I have not seen either of these films. I'm really excited for Ghost House in particular. All right, another Scream Factory movie that I was unaware, like not hip to really, was The Vagrant with Bill Paxton. This is a movie, I was familiar with it, but I had never seen it. This came out in 1992. It was directed by Chris Wallace, the special effects maestro, who had also previously directed The Fly 2, which had some amazing special effects. I was surprised, actually, because I didn't think, and this movie is not really a special effects heavy movie. It does have some great makeup for the titular Vagrant, but this one was so fun. Another movie that actually Retro Movie Love podcast inspired me to check out when he talked about it. But yeah, it's kind of more of a black comedy, actually, but with, you know, definite horror vibes about this yuppie. It's another one of those From Hell movies, too, which I love. I told you, like, the early 90s were chock full of those, like, From Hell movies, right? Like Single White Female, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, and so on. But this is the, I guess this is the homeless vagrant, you know, who's stalking you from hell, right? The guy, this vagrant keeps like coming into his house that this yuppie just bought and in LA, and it's just delightful. It's a fun movie, and I'm like, God, like that's how did I miss this like all these years? It's like my kind of flick. I love black comedies, so yeah, if you do and you like early 90s cinema, check it out. And then one more Scream Factory movie. We've got Dead Time Stories. This is another anthology. This one came out in 1986. It was directed by Jeffrey Dellman. And this one was okay. It, like, not as charming as After Midnight, in my opinion. This one sort of takes fairy tales and like updates them a little bit, modernizes them in a sense. And it was okay. It wasn't like amazing. I don't know if I'm going to go back to this one, you know, anytime soon. I'll probably, if I did, I'd probably watch it with a commentary. I love like director commentaries. But yeah, as far as 80s anthologies go, it was all right. It was all right. Okay, a few more. Next up, here we have a movie called Slashers. This is a movie from that wasteland of the early 2000s, 2001. It was directed by Maurice Devereaux. Sounds like a French-Canadian dude. I think this is a Canadian production. And this was one that I was like not familiar with, probably because, like I said, the early 2000s were a wasteland, and like, you know, I'm just not very particularly interested in that period of horror cinema. But I heard about this one, and this one sounded really intriguing. Basically, a Japanese game show where you go and you try to survive basically a bunch of like clowns and chainsaw wielding maniacs, and if you can make it, you get a lot of dough. And yeah, it sounded fun, and you know what? It was pretty fun. It was pretty fun, and it's stylish too for being, you know, another low budget movie. It's shot to be all like one continuous take. Like, it's definitely not. They've edited it, but it looks, you know, like it's all like the camera's constantly moving, and I appreciate that because there's nothing worse than a static, low budget horror movie. Like, just fucking kill me now if I have to watch that. But yeah, you know, so it had a lot of energy and verve and sense of humor, and so yeah, it was fun, actually. Check it out if you haven't seen that. All right, next up, we've got another more recent indie horror movie, or thriller. No, it is a horror movie. This is Summer of '84. This was directed by the team RKSS. This is their follow-up feature to Turbo Kid, which is a movie that I like quite a bit. And I was super excited for this one. I actually saw this in the theater. There's a great independent movie theater in Anaheim here in Orange County called The Frida, and they were playing this, and the screenwriter was in attendance, and he did like a Q&A after the movie, and you know, he talked about, of course, had to address the question, saying, oh yeah, this idea was like, this was in development like even before Stranger Things, because of course everyone's going to say this movie is trying to be Stranger Things, even though I don't know why Stranger Things is like always like being referred to as like the original thing that other things copy. I mean, Stranger Things is the ultimate copy machine, right? I mean, but I like it. Don't get me wrong. But anyway, this movie is, this is cool. It's fun. It's a kind of a dark, like horror thriller of these kids who suspect that the neighbor's a killer. So, you know, it's got that Fright Night vibe, which I like. And it's got kind of an unexpectedly grim and incredibly dark ending, which I appreciate. But yeah, if you haven't checked this one out, I think this one's also on Shudder if you subscribe to that streaming service. You know, it's worth checking out. Okay, next up, we've got The Good Son, a movie from my childhood. In fact, maybe one of the first horror movies that I saw in the theater. This is from 1993, and it was directed by Joseph Rubin, who is an incredible filmmaker. He's made some fantastic films, such as The Stepfather, one of the best thrillers of all time, Dreamscape, earlier in the 80s, and this one was written by Ian McEwan. Any of you literary types out there, if you may be familiar with that name, he's a very, very respected literary writer. I mean, he's won the freaking Man Booker Prize, and he's always had sort of like, well, earlier in his career, like his earlier novels were definitely gothic and sort of like had some real horror flavor, I should say, to them. But this is kind of like an evil kid movie starring Macaulay Culkin, and that was the big thing. I remember being in elementary school and we were all talking like did you hear about the new Macaulay Culkin movie? He plays like an evil kid. It was amazing. Like, we were all like super curious, and I saw it with some friends in the theater when I was like 11 years old. And I haven't really seen it since, like for many, many years. And it's a really good movie. It's a stylish movie, and it's kind of in a way another one of those From Hell movies. And it's got a beautiful Eastern United States location. I really enjoyed revisiting this one. This was put out by Kino Lorber. They do some good stuff occasionally. All right, just a few more, guys. I promise we're almost done, if you're still with me. Next up, another kind of recent indie horror flick, a horror comedy. This is Snatchers. It came out in 2019. It was directed by Steven Cedars and Benji Kleiman. And you know what? I enjoyed this flick. I thought it was fun. It's kind of like got that lighthearted, fun, like not to be taken seriously vibe. And I had a good time with it. Like if you just want like a popcorn flick, or like, it's another one of those Friday night pizza movies, like Jack Brooks' Monster Slayer. You just, throw this in. And don't take it too seriously. Don't question it. Don't overthink it. And it's a good time. All right, you guys, we're gonna close it out with a couple of SOV titles. So I am super late on this one, but I finally got around to picking up this. This is The Basement Retro 80s collection, Camp Retro 80s collection. This is it's a lost anthology that was originally shot in 1987 by a guy named Timothy O'Raw, who, like the following year or a couple years later, directed a super low budget, goofy horror flick called Ghoul School, which I'm a fan of. But this movie was lost for years, and then it was found, and they put it together in this release. And not only that, but the other reason that I picked this up is because it has 4 other sort of SOV, let's say classics, okay? It has Captives, Cannibal Campout, and Video Violence 1 and 2. And those are, I think some of the more beloved SOV horror movies. So pretty good deal to get all those. However, I missed out. I mean, when this first was on sale, it's sold out now. You can only get it like secondhand. But it came with an actual VHS of The Basement, and it came in like an old VHS big box, which I don't really care. I mean, I don't have the space for that anyway. So someone was just selling the DVD, which is all I needed. So yeah, finally picked that up. Glad I did. And then the last one, guys, if anyone's still there, last one is Channel 13. First of all, look at that cover. That is freaking amazing. This is another lost anthology. This one was shot in 1987, and it was directed by the Polonia brothers, who any fans of shot on video cinema may be familiar with their name. One of the Polonia brothers sadly passed away. I don't remember his name, but John Polonia, I believe, is the surviving brother, and this is one that, you know, this has got a great commentary track, and actually I listened to the commentary track on this one, and it's just really cool. It's super inspiring. I'm not even like an aspiring filmmaker, but I really just love hearing about these, you know, creatives and like what they do to create this art. And it is art, you know. I mean, people may shit on these shot on video movies, you know, shot on shitio, whatever you want to call it, but a lot of them are bad, but a lot of them have a lot of passion behind them, and yeah, so I you know, was happy to support this. And you know what, it was pretty fun, pretty entertaining. Obviously, like a shoestring budget, like it's like super cheap, but really cool. So, all right, guys, I'm freaking exhausted. That's it. That was my mega movie update for now, hopefully for a very long time. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have picked up any of those releases, especially any of the ones that I said I hadn't seen, feel free to drop a comment below. Let me know. Let me know what you've picked up lately. If you've you know, if you've purchased any Blu-rays or DVDs or seen anything good, let me know. Shoot a homie a suggestion. And thanks for watching, guys. You know I always appreciate it. I will see you later. Peace out.